Hello and welcome to What the Luxe with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. If you know sneakers, you know Jeff Staple. He's the man responsible for the infamous New York Pigeon sneaker, so popular that riots broke out across stores that stocked them. As well as this, he's worked on countless collaborations with the likes of Nike, Havaiana, Fila, Adidas, as well as LVMH, Remy Martin. The list is actually about a page long, so I've just cherry-picked a couple. Some of Jeff's sneakers have retailed for unbelievable amounts. One was auctioned only recently at Sotheby's for 6 digits. They're true collector's items that have taken on an iconic status and are an emblem of the moment. Through this, Jeff's been at the heart of the community since its inception, charting its rise from street culture through to the world of luxury. Jeff, welcome. We're so delighted to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
I'm also joined today by a co-host, Amit Patel, MOF's resident sneakerhead. Amit runs our design thinking school Experience House, and while there are many remarkable things about Amit, I'm just going to call out Canada as the one thing I'm 100% certain he'd like in his epitaph.
Thank you so much for having me, Anand and Jeff. Honored to meet you. Looking forward so much to chatting with you. Yeah, so I run the design school here. We share the studio space with MOF. It's a fantastic space. We have students who are doing some amazing things here. Much of our approach has been on the creative mindset, not just the methods and tools, but developing the mindset for people to go off and have successful careers in design and whatever avenues of design they go into. As Anand mentioned, I love sneakers. I think for me, it's the 90s basketball stuff that really kind of kicked off my appreciation and love for sneakers. I'm sure you in New York have seen so much of that kind of develop. So I kind of just want to start there with, for you, what have been some of the moments that have that you think back have kind of largely defined a part of your journey to where you are today?
I agree with you on that 90s basketball era. Probably, I guess I'm a little bit older than you because it probably started for me like in the mid to late 80s. It was, to me, these athletes that were just doing amazing things, obviously the GOAT, Michael Jordan, but even like Bo Jackson or Andre, Bo Jackson, two sport star, baseball, pro baseball and pro football, Andre Agassi with his swag. A particular favorite of mine was Michael Chang because, I'm Asian American, he's Asian American, and you have this 5'2" Chinese kid just like running circles around Boris Becker and Ivan Lendl and like these, John McEnroe, these greats. And so when you see these like gladiators on screen, you're just like, how do they do what they do? And there's no way that like me on my little playground basketball court or little tennis court can do that. But the only thing that I can sort of grasp that is, part of their DNA is the thing that they have on their feet, So if like, I go back to the gladiator reference, if a gladiator has a shield and a sword, an athlete, it's their sneakers, right? That's what allows them to do what they do. And so if that's the only thing that you as a commoner can sort of adorn yourself with to sort of get yourself 1% closer to that level of greatness, then I was all in on that. And for me as well, as you admit, that was the reason why I got into sneakers, is to try to improve myself on the court in any way I could.
Jeff, were you surprised that sneakers became this form of self-expression?
A little bit I was, but I would say my initial answer is yes, but when I dissect the reasons why, which because of my career and job, I've been forced to and want to over and over again every single week of my life, it's not surprising at all. I think it is surprising at first because people who were into sneakers in the 80s and 90s were like outcasts of society. Honestly, like for the vast majority of the world, sneakers are a commodity item in the same category as a Hanes white t-shirt, a rag, or toilet paper. Like you buy one, you use it, and when it dies, you throw it away and you get a new one. There's no reason to have, dare I say, 10 pairs of sneakers in your collection. Who needs 10, right? And of course, I'm sure admit you are way beyond 10, and a lot of people now are beyond 10, but we come from the era where like you had one wood bottom dress shoe, you had one maybe beach shoe, and then you had one sneaker, trainer, and that's it. So it is interesting that now it's become the norm for people to have, double-digit sneakers to accessorize and express their personalities with. And again, when I was doing that in the 80s, I was a nerd, like a real, like ridiculed, bullied nerd for having this obsession with footwear. Maybe similar in like, I don't want to insult any sort of subculture, but like maybe if you're really into like Dungeons and Dragons or like Magic cards or something, like you're like kind of a nerd, and it's like now to see a couple of decades later that it's become this pop culture mainstream thing that really influences lots of other huge circles of influence. It is at first surprising, but then when I start to drill in, I'm like, you know what? I was right all along, I think.
I'm going to ask a weird question, actually. You spoke about bullied, nerdishness, this type of thing. Like, I'm like this real believer that great creativity is born of a level of pain and persecution. Talk to us about your driving force.
There was a lot of that, like I think the other way of thinking about that is what is the chip on your shoulder that drives you every day, and those formative years between, ages 6 and 18 really mold who you are as an adult today. And hopefully those were positive things, but if they weren't, then you need years of therapy as an adult to like chip away at that chip on your shoulder, to like loosen it up so that you can be like a fully functioning adult. What happens in those like 12, 15 years are cemented into your soul, and, going back to my high school days, and even before that, elementary school, middle school, my parents were born in China and Hong Kong, respectively. They came to America in 1975, me inside of my mom's belly, with the strict purpose of having the first member of the clan with a U.S. passport, the first member of the clan to go and graduate high school, right? That was like the mission for me. And that was preordained. That was the entire reason for why they were coming to America. And so they land in the middle of New Jersey, literally the middle, about an hour away from New York City. And, I went to a school of 1,600 kids, and there was 3 Asians. There was like maybe 5 black kids. I think there was 2 Indian kids, and everyone else was white, right? And so for me, getting through middle school and high school and surviving that meant assimilation. In the 80s, there was no wokeness of like, I am proud of who I am, fuck with me, or like, no, it was like, you will eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you will never speak Chinese, you will never acknowledge the Buddha, like you just stay in your lane, lay low, and don't get ridiculed. This is, I'm talking about the 80s and 90s here, and this was like common. Literally every single day of my childhood had a racial slur spat at me. And I know, like, to someone listening today in 2023, especially if you're young, you're like, how could you allow that to happen? Why didn't you start a cancel culture policy and picket like, no, there was none of that back then. Like, racism was an everyday occurrence to the point where I was institutionalized to just think like, this is normal for people to call you these racial slurs. It was actually like the norm, not the abnorm.
I totally relate to that. When I was growing up, there are things that I look back at now which were normalized for me, which I now think about. And I'm like, in today's cultural context, you'd be hung out to dry for making the types of comments and slurs that were part of everyday life, actually.
Oh, yeah. I remember vividly my U.S. history teacher using a racial slur on me in a class, like in the middle of 40 other people. He said, like, we were talking about, like, when the Chinese came to America to sort of help build the railroads. And he was like, it was really diabolical. He flipped it as a lesson. He's like, you know what they used to call the Chinese that came to America to build the railroads? They used to call them coons. And then he looked at me and he's like, Jeff, do you know that word coon? Have you heard of, like, in front of all of these kids? It's wild, my teacher. And those are the types of things that you mentioned that, like, I will never forget that moment. I will never forget that feeling. And so the further piling up of the feeling of like, don't express who you actually are, duck and hide to survive for, 18 years added to that sort of trauma. Ironically, when I moved to New York City and went to New York University and then Parsons, which is obviously way more diverse, NYU's student body is damn near 48% Asian, I think. I thought like, this is great, salvation, I found my people, but then something flipped. It was interesting because I had been institutionalized to act like a New Jersey white person. When I found my people, they were like, Jeff, you are so white. They were like, you'd rather go to Applebee's than dim sum. You don't sing karaoke. Like, you don't watch Fast and the Furious. Like all of these like things that like the Asians were really into. I was like, yeah, I'd rather just like watch Family Ties, and like eat popcorn or like chicken wings or something, like it was like reverse racism where they were like, you're not Asian enough to hang out with us, and so it happened again, sort of this imposter syndrome. And then a little bit later in my career, this is late university, when I started to get into really like the elemental roots of hip hop culture, and I realized I wanted to create something, I didn't know what it was yet, that would be like an homage or a contribution to hip hop culture. Hip hop culture is obviously mostly Black and brown. There's not really room for a Chinese person, even in 2023, forget about 1995, right? But, again, I was like this sort of outcast of like, what the hell are you doing in this open mic night? What are you doing in this like B-boy battle? I was another anomaly. So like everywhere I went, I was sort of like an outcast of society.
It's interesting because your work is really about identity and expression. And it sounds like your identity was perhaps in a state of flux because there was a lack of belonging to these various cultures. And through that, do you think that drove you to identify with subcultures that were perhaps less mainstream? Or
maybe I would say the one thing that it did do, because I was hiding who I was, whether it was like physically or emotionally, I think the silver lining in that is that it made me realize that what I produce and what I output into the world is king. No one's going to applaud me because like, you're such a good looking guy, you're such a well-standing citizen of the Asian community. Or if the hip hop Black community was like, oh, he's so down. Like, no, it's not going to be because like I'm popular or I'm cool or I know who I know. I'm only going to succeed if the thing that I make is stellar. It needs to be at 100 because I cannot rely on these other things that other people use to get ahead or get by in life. And so it made me hone my blade on execution and product development, and in my case, design. For the most part, people didn't even know Staple was owned by a Chinese person. And I did that deliberately because I thought it would hinder, the growth of Staple. If they knew that this sort of like streetwear, urban brand, which is what they called streetwear before they invented the word streetwear, was owned and designed by this Chinese kid from New Jersey. So I was so kind of ashamed of that I held that back and just said like, just enjoy the brand. And if you, after being a fan of the brand for 2 years, you discover that it's owned and operated by a Chinese person, great. But I'm not going to fly that flag first and foremost,
I just want to take a step back to the super interesting how you were talking about the assimilation and the kind of the stark reality of hitting you when you kind of changed from kind of going from high school to say university, and then kind of also kind of looping in the talk about kind of the nerdism, if that's a word, about sneakers. Like at what point, because I could see that there's potentially, I'm just going to follow the crowd and now what they're doing career wise and do what everyone else is doing because now I have a feeling I have to kind of almost fit in, although you're trying to react to it. At what point did you feel I'm really going to go down and sharpen my blade at what I want to do? And what was the driving force behind saying, this is what I want my career to be?
The life hack there, the secret unlock, is that moment that you're trying to describe in my life never actually occurred. There was never a moment where I said, I am going to buck the system and go against what all of my friends are doing, getting their accounting, medical, and legal degrees, and do this anti-establishment thing, right? The secret is that I randomly discovered this cross-section of hip-hop culture, skate culture, and sneaker culture. It was the petri dish pre-evolution of street culture. And I fell in love with it. I fucking was just 24/7 enamored by this entire culture, to the point where there wasn't a choice for me anymore. You know, there wasn't like a thing where I had to convince myself to do this. Sure, there were times where like, are you being reasonable, Jeff? Like, is this the right path? But there wasn't like, I wasn't doing this to like show off to my friends or like go against my parents. I, at like the age of 20, discovered something that I truly fell in love with to my core. And then after you do that, there's no choice for you but to pursue that. And so when young people ask me, I don't know what to do with my life, how do I do what you did? The answer is not like what checks the box of what success means to you. The answer is actually, what do you love to do? And if you don't have the immediate 1 second answer to that question, you need to figure out that answer. And in my opinion, figuring out that answer means sampling as much of life as possible, you know, so that you can sort of discover what it is that pulls at you. And the great thing is that in this day and age, you know, in 2023, that can literally be anything you want it to be. If you love like basket weaving, you can be a star TikTok basket weaver. If you like video games, you can be a millionaire Twitch streamer playing video games, you know, whereas 20 years ago, there were legitimately things that were like, oh, that's nice that you like that, but you will die poor and like hungry, you know. But nowadays, I mean, literally, I don't think I can think of a thing that like there's no market for, you know. But it's really just finding that passion. I know it's kind of cliched, but like I think a lot of people, even though they say they are doing it or say they've done it, they still haven't truly unlocked that thing. The good old 10,000 hour rule of like mastering something. Another way that you can analogize that is like running a marathon versus running a sprint, right? The thing is, if you believe that in order to harness the level of expertise that you need to succeed is the 10,000 hour or running multiple marathons, what you need to understand is that if you don't fully love the thing, you can't invest 10,000 hours. You can't finish the marathon if you don't love running. You can motivate yourself with huge bags of money for a period of time, but even, you know, think about it. If I put $1 million at the end of 5 marathons and you hate running, can you get there? No. At the third marathon, you can be like, fuck this. I'm going to figure out a different way to make my $1 million, you know? So like that only motivates you so much. You have to actually love the thing.
We certainly see a lot of that, obviously, here at Experience House. We see a lot of people who are shifting their careers. They've started in something, they don't love it. And to your point, like there's just so much more kind of avenues that people can explore now. I also think the speed at which you can do that now is so much greater than it was 10, 20 years ago, with so much online resources, shorter courses, a series of things that you can do to it's almost like shift your entire kind of career path within 3 months or 4 months. It's unbelievable.
Can you talk to us about the community of street culture? You were there right at the beginning, and it started as something that there were a few of you, and you're all still in the game now, and the culture has gone from something that was quite niche to something that became increasingly mainstream, that is now quite luxury as well. And can you just talk to us on that journey?
I love it, and I don't often pat myself on the back, but I will say that if you look back on interviews, even dating back to like 2002, you can hear me saying that like this culture that we call street culture or sneakerheads or whatever is going to be bigger than hip hop culture, than skate culture, than luxury culture. Like it's going to be the biggest one, even though at the time we were the Dungeons and Dragons nerds, but I knew that it was going to be the biggest one and was going to influence all of them. So I will give myself credit for that. Why did it I mean, I could have been completely wrong, right? But why did it happen? I mean, I'm not going to credit myself for why it happened. I think it was like an army of people that were doing it. I just recognized and knew the beauty in it. It's just like the perfect amalgamation of everything that I loved about all of those other subcultures that I mentioned, you know, hip hop, punk, skate, sneakers, sports, music, all of that. If you took the best of all of that and sort of combined it into like this dish and then added the sprinkle of like design and artistic integrity, how could you not love that thing, you know? And I knew it was only a matter of time before general population would fall in love with it as well. And so by me sticking with it over, last year, I celebrated the 25th anniversary of the founding of the brand, not to mention how long I've just been even a fan of the culture. I just knew that if I stuck with it, people would eventually figure out why this is such a great thing. And I'm glad that premonition sort of came to fruition.
What was the backdrop to it all?
New York City, I have to say, it's like, you ask about the backdrop. I mean, that was where I honed my skill. There's no better place to test if you're battle ready than New York City. And I think New York is the only place that street culture could have been born and could have flourished. And the whole world still to this day looks at New York as the mecca for it, So that to me is still the backdrop. New York is an incredible place. To me, it's the only city that has the ability to fight you back. You live in other cities. New York lives in you. And New York has the ability to expel people that don't deserve to be in New York.
In terms of your own creative process, as you've been kind of building this within the city, are there places within, like specific places within the city that spark inspiration, or where you go to have creative moments?
Everywhere, like not really. Like obviously I reside downtown, my stores are downtown, my offices are downtown. So there's something about downtown culture dating back to like even the 70s and 80s with like, East Village, Greenwich Village, Soho, Lower East Side, Chinatown. These are all those neighborhoods that I just mentioned are all within a 30-minute walk of each other, right? So it's very condensed, very multicultural. It's not really one particular thing. I think it's more about the sampling of it. And I don't want to take away from, Shoreditch, Harajuku, Kreuzberg, Fairfax, Los Angeles. Like there are epicenters in other parts of the world that express the sort of same energy. Maybe one of the secrets to my longevity and consistency is that I enjoy sampling all over the world. Because if you are trying to be a voice or an expert in street culture, I think you have to walk the streets of the world, right? Like I have peers who live and die by, Orchard Street in New York City in the Lower East Side, and that's the whole brand is predicated. There's even a brand called Orchard Street, in fact, right? Like, so their whole existence is predicated on that. But I think by doing that, you're only like sampling one aspect of street culture. Why not Shibuya or Harajuku or like, there's an Orchard Road, by the way, in Singapore. Like you should walk that Orchard Road and see the difference, And I think by me being able to sample all of these different things, it inevitably goes into the things that I create.
Right. As we're talking about the creative process, can you now talk to us about the Pigeon and how you felt when you were designing what became such a hugely iconic sneaker?
Yeah, the Pigeon is the mascot for my brand staple. And so for people listening who aren't familiar, it's sort of like if Ralph Lauren, you think of the polo horse, or like Lacoste, you think of the alligator or crocodile. For Staple, who are fans of Staple, they think of the Pigeon, and that's the mascot. In 2001, about 4 to 5 years after I started the brand in 1997, I wanted to adopt a mascot for the brand because of the reasons that I just said. Like those brands that I mentioned have this global affinity that stretches beyond language. Like when anyone in the world sees the swoosh or the polo horse, they know what that means. Even the Jumpman, right? Like anybody. And whereas if you just have like letters and numbers, it's not as strong. So I was like looking for this icon or this mascot. And here I am, this, punk kid, like trying to get through New York City 24/7 on my grind. And what I observed is that everywhere that I went, pigeons were there also 24/7. If I'm working late one night and going home at 4 a.m., there's pigeons out and they're trying to eat. And, I started to get this affinity where I was like, man, you pigeons are trying to eat just like I'm trying to eat. And also everyone hates you, right? Like, and back in 97, everyone hated what I was doing. Not only the thing I mentioned earlier, like whether it's like the Chinese community was like, the fuck you doing making these dumb t-shirts? Black and brown communities like, get out of here, you chink. My parents being like, stop wasting your time, get a real job. Like everyone was hating on this thing that I was trying to build, right? And everyone hates pigeons too. And I was like, it'd be wild if I adopted the pigeon as my mascot, because nobody likes it. And for sure, no one's done it because nobody likes it. And I remember when I told my small team of like 5 people at the time, they were like, Jeff, you know everyone hates pigeons, right? I was like, I know. That's why it's so cool, you know? So we started to think about how to incorporate the pigeon into our design work and use it as our mascot. And that's when, at 2002, Nike reached out to me and said, we are celebrating the anniversary of the Nike Dunk, and we're dedicating one of them to New York City. Jeff, would you like to design that shoe? That was literally a phone call that I got on a landline phone in 2002. And I'll never forget that. I was like, let me think about that. Hung up and did cartwheels, right? Like, did cartwheels. And like, you know, that's where I was like, man, what if we premiered this logo and this icon on a Nike Dunk and made the Dunk just look like a pigeon? The whole thing just looks like a pigeon. And in case you didn't know, we're going to embroider a pigeon on the heel just to make it super known. And I remember presenting that idea back to headquarters in good old Beaverton, Oregon, an hour and a half outside of Portland, Oregon. And I was like, I got the idea, guys. Pigeon. And they were like, what? No, the brief was New York City. Make a shoe dedicated to New York. I was like, I know. Pigeon. They're like, what? And you know, there was a lot of back and forth. I remember saying, like, listen, guys, no disrespect, but the fact that you guys live in Beaverton, Oregon, and you don't understand why a pigeon means New York City should be the entire reason why you should allow me to do this, because it's not for you. It's for New Yorkers. They will know. In fact, even if you lived in New Jersey or Connecticut and you worked in New York, you might not know. This is literally only for people who live and breathe and hustle in New York. They will get it. And thankfully, Nike trusted me. They were just like, all right, no change. Literally, there was not a single design review on this, edit. It was, I presented and we just went in and made that shoe. And then when it released, as you mentioned earlier, it was crazy. I mean, a riot broke out. People wanted the shoe bad. People slept outside of my store for 5 days trying to get this shoe in February in New York through a blizzard. Okay. And then NYPD came to break up the crowd. But if you can imagine a kid sleeping outside for 5 days through a blizzard, and then a cop tells you to get off the line, you're not getting off that line. And so a lot of altercations started to happen. My store happened to be situated in between 2 housing projects in the Lower East Side. And when you got kids with money waiting outside on a street for 5 days, people from the housing projects are going to come as well and start to see what's up. And so you had this mix of like sneakerheads, hood guys, the NYPD, all mixed together in this one block in front of my store. And it was a powder keg, you know, and then it exploded into a riot situation. People got arrested. People brought weapons. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. For better or for worse, I feel like as a store owner, it was a failure on that day. Like I botched a thing. The silver lining of it is that the next day, the New York Post put the riot on the front page, headline news. That same evening, CBS, Fox, NBC all broadcasted what was going on downtown, that kids were going crazy and rioting over a pair of sneakers. And so overnight, you know, 90-year-old grandma in New Jersey who buys one pair of sneakers for 20 years is like, what the honey, have you heard? People are lining up for sneakers and paying over retail price for them. And on that day, February 22nd, 2005, sneaker culture was global.
And it's gone from that to now into the domain of luxury. What's that journey been like?
I love it because to me, it's the bet that I've been making my entire life. And so when, you know, Balenciaga and LVMH are putting out sneakers now, and naturally, for the most part, a lot of luxury brands' entire livelihood and existence is because of their sneaker category now, right? And if you look at the clothing too, I mean, you look at brands right now like, you know, Loewe, LVMH, like they damn near look like streetwear brands now to me. Like I can't even tell the difference. I was at Harrods, a couple weeks ago at the LVMH section. There were skateboards and duffel bags and like extra large hoodies. Like I was like, this looks like Zoomies in America. Like it's like Zoomies is like a skate shop in America, I was like, I can't even tell the difference except the price tag, of course. But it's great. It's really validating, to be honest. You mentioned Sotheby's, the very old school traditional art auction house, just recently sold a pair of my sneakers for $100,000. And when you talk about the chip on the shoulder, man, that feels great. Here this kid who was trying to like duck his way through life, dealing with, racism, predominantly white culture, and then like trying to have this, beat this imposter syndrome all throughout my life. And then having these sort of validation points occur is really great. But I gotta say, the double-edged sword is that I always check myself. I'm like, yeah, great, Sotheby's sold my shoe for $100,000, but I'm still seeking acceptance from the man. Like, why? Why do I care? Like, get over it, Jeff. But like, that's the struggle. That's why I need to see my therapist again, because it's like it's the duality of that. Like, I shouldn't care that Sotheby's cares now. I should be like, fuck them, but I do care. Like, at the end of the day, I still seek their approval. It's annoying.
In terms of the work that you continue to do, and even, just say looking to the future, are there any individuals? I mean, I completely, take on the whole thing, cash and craft, that, but are there people that help you fill that gas and give you that kind of energy? Are there any specific people that you look to kind of help you in your own kind of day-to-day work?
I have my team. My team is incredible, of course, but that's sort of the obvious answer. I have mentors, but my mentors don't know that they're my mentors, which I think is pretty key. I get a lot of young people asking me like, Jeff, will you mentor me? It's like, maybe. That's a lot of pressure to mentor a human being. I don't want to put that pressure on somebody, but if you have people that you respect what they're doing, and occasionally you can like ping them for a lunch or a coffee, and the most ideal mentorship relationship is one that goes two ways. Ideally, I learn something from them, but they can learn something from me as well. And that's where like sharing actually happens. And I have a few of those, but I would call them dear friends versus mentors, but we're definitely learning from each other.
I'm really interested in hearing you talk to the Stapleverse. What sparked the idea, where it's at, what your hopes and dreams for it are?
Yeah, the Stapleverse is another entity that I formed to house all the digital asset creation that I've done, right? So in case you're not familiar with what I'm speaking about, everything that I've done in the past has been physical clothing that you wear on your body, or physical shoes that you wear, or actual design work, right, that gets printed into a magazine. And this is actually a really good reference in case like, you're not up to speed on what's happening with Web3. Previously, an artist would create something and then combine that into a book, a printed book or a magazine, right? But now, as most people can understand, artists can display their work digitally, like on Instagram in a 10 carousel post. You can see art that way. Most people can realize that. What the shift that's happened is now you're absorbing work digitally only in a digital format, right? And so now you can imagine an acclaimed successful artist that has never put out a coffee table book. That's quite normal in 2023. Like, oh, he's huge on Instagram. He has a huge following on TikTok. His website gets visited by millions of people, but he's never put out a book. And we still validate him as an artist, right? Web3 is the continuation of that line, where art can be owned in a digital-only manner without having necessarily a physical element to it. And if you've heard of the blockchain is really the contract that proves that you're the owner of that digital art. Because as we all know, digital art, you can take a screenshot of it, you can right-click, save to your desktop, and then you have that piece of art, right? But you have a copy of it. The blockchain is what determines and says that you have the original of that digital, right? So it's very similar to, I'll give you the Web 1 and 2 equivalent of that. If I bought a print from an artist, right, I bought the original, one of one. It's got a COA. It's got a certificate of authenticity that says this is the one of one. Yes, I can go to Kinko's and make 100 copies of that and give it out to my friends. They have copies of the same exact artwork, but they don't have the COA that proves that it's the original one. That's what the blockchain is. The thing is with the COA can be forged and copied as well, right? You could do the raised stamp, sure. I can get the raised stamp also made and do that too. The blockchain is sort of immutable, and it proves without a shred of doubt that you are in fact the owner. And that's a really powerful thing when you can document, A, who was the original owner of something, but then if you've sold this or given it to 20 of your friends, every one of the 20 friends that have transacted on that piece is also shown on the blockchain, which if you think about the car analogy of like a company called Carfax, if you buy a used car, you want to know how many people had it before you. This company called Carfax does that. Imagine doing that for every single digital asset in the world. That's the power of the blockchain. And so when we create things digitally, I want to do it on chain. That's where they call that term on chain. And I really do feel like that's the future because, going back to that sneaker that we referenced that Sotheby's just sold for $100,000, the original wholesale price of that sneaker, the price that I paid Nike for that sneaker was $32.50. That was the original price. It didn't go from $32.50 to $100,000 in one transaction. It went 120, 300, 550, like 75. It like built its way up. That sneaker probably went through 15, 20 people's hands before it got to $100,000. But me, the creator of that, I only made the $32.50 transaction. That's the only time I made money from that sneaker. The guy who just sold it for $100K and the Sotheby's got their cut, I got not a penny of that. I got goodwill, I got the halo of it, but I didn't get financial benefit. If that was on chain, I could have said on chain in the contract, 10% of every transaction will go back to the creator. And so every time it flipped, I would have gotten 10%. Like that is a game changer for creators, So that's why I just love it.
What I also love about it is the fact that the curatorial equity or the equity of the individuals who've been part of that journey contributes to the final value of the item, which I think for me is a really nice theme, right?
You're right. Everyone who contributed to that could be built into the smart contract to be compensated.
Exactly. Jeff, what does luxury mean to you?
Luxury has changed. The definition of luxury has changed over the course of the last few decades that I've been fortunate enough to experience luxury. It used to be the thing you had, the thing that you owned that represented a luxury class. And when I say class, I mean like a group of people, right? So like a Rolex is a good example of that, or like an LV handbag shows that you are in this class of, maybe a couple of thousand of other people that possess this thing. And then I think when that room of luxury class started to feel a little crowded, people started to look for a more personalized view of that, right? So then you would get your initials engraved on it, or you get the guy at Hermes to paint a stripe of a color on it. And then, you've got things like Nike ID, which is now called Nike For You, where you can make an Air Force One, just one of one for yourself, right? So it evolved into this like personalization one of one thing. But then I think what people quickly realized is that like, I'm going to use this analogy of like the VIP room at a nightclub, right? There's like the nightclub where everyone is in, and then there's the VIP room, which is great. But nobody wants to be in the VIP room by themselves, right? Like you don't want a one-on-one VIP room. If you're in there, you're going to be like, I actually kind of want to go back down to like where all the other people are. They're looking like they're having fun. So the fact that you made this one-of-one Air Force One or this one-of-one Birkin bag is like too limited now. It's like we went too far, And now I think even coming out of like this pandemic, I think the idea of service and the human interaction is really what luxury is all about. And part of that is because it's still very difficult to replicate and scale that using technology, as we just said. Like that feeling of walking into a place and feeling welcomed and attended to is difficult for the Amazons of the world to figure out. Like when I stay at the Four Seasons and I walk out of the elevator into the lobby and the person standing there says, "Good afternoon, Mr. Staple," I'm blown away I'm like, how did I just walk out of the elevator and you just knew immediately who I, like, how do you do that? Do you have a camera in the hallway and you monitor me coming down? Like, anyway, it's wild and I freaking love it. And it's just those tiny little touches. You know, I go to this restaurant for brunch in Manhattan, and when I walk in, the maitre d' greets me, and you know what he says? Welcome home. I freaking love that. How hard is that to do? That's not hard. Anybody could do that, right? Like, I could go to McDonald's and they could say welcome home. But when this guy does it, that's freaking luxury, man. I love that feeling, you know? And so I think that's like the new way. And I hope technology never figures out how to like AI scale that, because that feeling just gets to your core so well, you know?
What are your thoughts on AI and its impact on creativity?
This to me is just another blip. I mean, like, people keep saying like this is going to change the world. I think it will, you know, just like e-commerce changed the world, and some people will suffer from that, right? Like, people who don't want to adapt and don't want to acknowledge that the change is happening, they may suffer. But I also don't think you have to like completely take the blue pill and immerse yourself completely into AI or you're lost. I just think if you accept what's happening and learn about it, just like you should have learned about online banking, right? Like, I remember the days of having a checkbook and you had to like reconcile the checkbook every month and like figure out if it all balanced up. And then I remember the days where like my bank said, hey, we're going to introduce a website. You just type in a username and a password and you could access your funds. And I was like, hell no. Like, I want my checkbook. I want my checks. Right. And it took me a while, you know, even CDs to MP3. I was like, I'm not giving up my CD collection. Are you crazy? I'm not going to let my music all live in here, you know. But if you adapt to it, it's nice. It's just, you know, you can learn a lot. So I think AI, metaverse, all of these things are just added chapters to how we can express ourselves and how we can live life. It's not going to, you know, rip your head off and make our whole humankind extinct. It's going to be fine.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. Jeff, how many shoes do you have?
I stopped counting after 4,000 pairs of shoes. They're in multiple storage units, multiple homes. They're stashed away in many different places. It just keeps coming. And I'm not proud of it. I try to like remove some here and there, but I love shoes, man. I mean, it's like if you collected watches and you had like 50 watches, or if you had 300 bottles of wine, or if you had like, you know, 50 Picassos, it would not be strange. But it is strange to have hundreds, if not thousands, of pairs of sneakers. But I see them in the same realm. Like, they're pieces of mini art to me, and I want to collect them so I can understand the variances in all the art. The thing that's really interesting about shoes, and the reason why I love them so much, is because there's so much culture packed into a shoe, right? You have sports engineering, technology, fashion, color theory, music, right? Trend, fabrication, sustainability. All of these things are packed into a sneaker that costs at retail like $125. It's like you can't really get that much culture packed into such a accessible thing. The other cool thing about sneakers is that they are a commodity item that are meant to be worn and used, right? So if you spent money on a piece of art, you don't carry the art around and like show it, like, you know, but people are buying these mini pieces of art and then going into the underground tube with them and just stepping in dog shit in them, right? So there's like this very ephemeral kind of like graffiti-like thing where like the more I love the shoe and the more I want to wear it, the faster it dies. It's like this weird, like, I love this. I don't want to wear it, but I do want to wear it because I want to show it off. But if I wear it, it dies. So I don't want to wear it, right? Like, so I need to buy two now. I need one to wear and one to keep, you know? So like, it's just, there's nothing like that, you know? It's pretty cool.
So what percentage of those 4,000 shoes have you worn?
I wore all of them. I wear all the shoes at least once. Yeah.
Okay. And on that note, I'm now going to ask Amit what percentage of his shoes he's worn.
I've gone through a shift in the last couple of years where now I'm trying to wear everything that I have. I got rid of a lot during COVID. If I'm never going to wear it, then I don't need to have it, and I'll just reinvest in ones that I'm actually going to wear. My collection's probably 120 or something. It's not anywhere close to 4,000. My wife would kill me if I started kind of trying to grow that to that size. I would love to have it.
Does your wife think you're insane for even having over 100 pairs of sneakers?
I don't even get them delivered to the house anymore. I get them delivered to work and then take them home with me so I can kind of just carry them in on my own. But I think there's a feeling. Like in the morning I wake up, I have some kind of feeling about the day. I'm looking at, and then I'll say what kind of shoe matches up to that moment that I'm in that.
That's a sign of a sneakerhead. A true sneakerhead is you start to decide what you're going to wear from the feet first. Most people just put their shirt, pants, and walk out and decide what to put on their feet. No, sneakerheads go the other way.
So, and a question that I wanted to ask a little bit earlier, actually, in terms of the sneakers, I know obviously we've been seeing collaborations in the luxury space with Dior, with Louis Vuitton, Tiffany. Are there any collaborations that we haven't seen yet that in the luxury space with sneakers that truly would excite you and that you would be kind of really looking forward to see what they do with it?
Nothing, to be honest, in the luxury world as it pertains to sneakers has really excited me. And I'll tell you why. It's because I know that the luxury houses don't actually care about the culture. And it's fine. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the hype right now. And 10 years from now, they will not be. You know, they're going to listen to their legacy customer, and their legacy customers, which are primarily old white people, they're going to let this little like blip of skate, sneaker, streetwear slide for a little bit. But eventually, they're going to want their frilly hats and their trunks back, right? They're going to want that back, and they get it. This is a moment of social awareness and wokeness, and you guys have to adapt to people of color. It's inclusive. We understand this is good for business, but eventually they're going to be like, come on, guys, let's get back to where we come from here. You know, when you sort of like, if you're married and then you date like the stripper for a little bit, that's what we are. We're like the side piece right now to luxury brands.
What's the version of street culture that will feed tomorrow's aspirational product?
And this is nothing new in street culture, but in fact, most of the luxury brands that you see working with streetwear brands today started as bootlegs. Like Supreme Louis Vuitton, Supreme bootleg Louis Vuitton and got sued by LVMH for it back in the day. And now it's like an actual collaboration, you know? I remember back in my rave days, kids were always flipping the McDonald's logo and saying like marijuana, and you know, with the golden arches and shit, you know, like, and now McDonald's is doing Cactus Plant and Travis Scott and like all of these like streetwear collaborations, you know? So I think, to answer your question, kids should keep on bootlegging. I realized that the only different, you know, the brand Bape, right? Bape and Bapesta and the sneakers and everything. I realized the only difference between a bootlegger and Bape is marketing. It's the only difference. And race, because Nigo is Japanese. But like, if Nigo was born in South China, he would be a bootlegger. But because he's from, you know, like Tokyo, it's the marketing of it that makes it cool.
Visu being like a good example, right?
Visu, another great example. If Visu was in China, they'd be stamped out by Levi's. But because they're from Japan and they have great marketing, thank you for existing, Visu, you know? But that bootleg culture is still something that I love because today's bootlegger is tomorrow's brand.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What's coming up for you, for the brand, you know, for your work, your legacy? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I honestly try not to think that far ahead. I don't even try to think 5 years ahead. I honestly don't even try to think about what's happening on Monday too much. You know, as we all have witnessed through the pandemic and through, you know, all the bullshit that's happening in the world today, life is very precious and very short. And for you to stress yourself out about what's going to happen in a week, a month, or a year is really futile and pointless. You know, the only thing you could really control is like what you're going to have for lunch today. You can't even guarantee dinner is going to happen, you know? And I think when I look back on, you know, the 25 years that I've had the brand, it's not because in 1997 I had a 10-year business plan outlined. It's because I knew how to take my left foot and put it in front of my right foot. And then I just repeated that for 25 years. And that's how I got to where I am. Because I think if you set these like sort of, let's face it, BS goals and targets and dreams, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I feel like you're just setting yourself up for like failure. How could you possibly know what's going to happen? So I just try to take it one day at a time. What I think I do have is an incredibly good bullshit detector in my life. And so when I wake up in the morning, if I smell bullshit, I'm trying to remove that bullshit from my life. And that's it. I just repeat that every day. And if you do that, I think that's a definition of happiness.
Cool. Jeff, we always ask our guests the same 4 questions. The first is, what most irritates you about your industry?
The thing that probably irritates me the most right now is people trying to be overnight successes. And it's not even their fault. I think social media has a lot to do with this, because social media only shows you the highlight reels. No one does an Instagram post about their like credit score or how much they owe on their mortgage, right? Like, they just like, look at my house. Yeah, now post like your interest rate, on your mortgage, right? Like, no one shows that shit. So it's like, if you're like a very impressionable 17-year-old, you're just like, yeah, I want this. And you don't see like what it took to get there. So the thing that irritates me is when I see kids just trying to be these overnight successes without understanding the blood, sweat, and tear that it takes to get there. And I know I'm sounding like your dad right now talking to you if you're listening to this and you're 17, but like, trust me, like, there is no expressway. Like, sure, there might be, like, you might hit a lotto ticket, you might get an inheritance. There could be like this sort of black swan moment that changes your life in one instant. But by and large, if you're not willing to put in the work, you won't get the reward.
What would you do if you weren't doing what you do? You ever thought about that? Do you know what that might be?
Yeah, I do think about that quite often. I would be a teacher at a school. I've taught before, and I liked it a lot. I loved it, actually. The only thing I didn't like about it was the lack of scale and the barrier to entry. So I'd be teaching a class of 50 kids, and all the 50 kids come from high net worth families that knew somebody that got them into this program. And here I am teaching the elite how to be more elite. And what I love about what I do with product and street culture is I'm teaching every kid, and the admission fee is the price of a t-shirt. So if this whole thing that I do were to end, I would probably go back to teaching, because I really do have a love for that.
And my last question, what is the thing that most excites you at the moment?
Lunch. Honestly, lunch.
I think we should just leave it on lunch, actually.
Yeah, I'm a very even-keeled person. I don't get super, super sad about stuff, and I don't get super ecstatic about stuff. We have a huge collaboration with this brand, Wilson, who makes the basketballs for the NBA. We're dropping that. We have a huge event tonight. Literally at like 6 p.m. there's an event. It's 12 noon right now in New York. But I'm equally excited about that as I am for what I'm going to have for lunch. It's all the same for me.
Nicely said. Look, just to wrap up my side, really appreciated kind of talking with you. I've watched tons of your stuff. I've listened to your podcast. I've watched the day in the life of Jeff Staple walking around in New York. So it's been amazing to have this opportunity to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Jeff, you're equally inspiring and level-headed. Thank you very much for the last hour. It's been great to listen to you talk.
It has been. This was fun, guys. I needed this in the morning, so appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Luxe. You can find us on socials at Matter of Form, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLuxe. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterofform.com and chat to one of our consultants.